Between 1791 and 1917, 1/3 of the Jews of Europe lived in Ukraine, within the Pale of Settlement. The large number of Jews in the region became a frequent target of harassment, attacks, and pogroms. What are the attitudes of non-Jews in Ukraine today towards Jews, Judaism, and the State of Israel? Our next panel will discuss this critical subject.
Thank you. Welcome to the panel, How Anti-Semitic is Ukraine, part of the second annual Kyiv Jewish Forum. We have with us today really an all-star lineup of panelists. I'd like to tell you a bit about them. First off, we have Dmytro Kuleba, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. We have Ambassador Joel Leon, Ambassador of the State of Israel to Ukraine. We also have Katarina von Schnurbein, European Commission Coordinator on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. And finally, we have Rabbi Andrew Baker, the personal representative of the OSCE Chairman in Office on combating anti-Semitism and Director of the International Jewish Affairs of the American Jewish Committee. And we're going to be discussing a subject that is extremely important to our understanding of modern Ukraine and also to Ukraine's development as a democratic and European state. It's not a secret that in Jewish history, Ukraine has often been regarded as an anti-Semitic country, a country that is perhaps seen as more anti-Semitic than its neighbors. But the situation is not necessarily the same today. It's a lot more complicated. And opinions differ as to how widespread anti-Semitism is in Ukraine. In March 2018, the Pew Research Center found that only 5% of Ukrainians would not accept Jews as fellow citizens, a figure that was significantly lower than in neighboring countries. However, an Anti-Defamation League survey found that between 2016 and 2019, the number of Ukrainians holding anti-Semitic views rose from 32% to 46%. But as with virtually anything, both of these results are controversial, and the situation is quite complicated. What is the situation with anti-Semitism in Ukraine today, and what can the country do to fight it? That's the subject of our discussion. We'll begin by letting each of our panelists give a short introductory statement. So I now hand it over to Minister Kuleba.
Hi, hello to everybody. It's my pleasure and honor to join you on this panel. Well, I firmly believe that there is no place for anti-Semitism in any country of the world, and Ukraine is no exception. This is the founding principle that every country should be based on. No anti-Semitism, no anti-human feelings. We should build societies that are founded on trust and mutual understanding and on tolerance. Of course, history in this part of the world has been very difficult, but for me and for millions of my compatriots, Jewish community, Jews, have always been an integral and an indispensable part of our society. You know, my father comes from eastern Ukraine, from Poltava region, from a very small village, which is about 15 kilometers away from the nearest road connecting Kyiv and Poltava. And he never knew that Jews lived in the village in that very village. Only a couple of years ago, when we gained access to archives, did we realize that there were a couple of Jewish households in that village. And the history of that mutual cohabitance was erased with Second World War to the deepest regrets. But I think this very simple fact shows how Ukrainians and Jews shared the same land, same villages, same life for many, many years before the bloodshed started. I'm absolutely confident that both social nationalism and international socialism represented by the regimes of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin were deeply anti-Semitic. I do remember the history of Jews in the Soviet Union, all the limitations and difficulties that they had to experience. And I think that we do have to remember history and treat it like history. But we should build a country where no one feels insecure, where everyone's contribution to the society, to the reputation of the country, to its development is appreciated. And for me, it doesn't matter whether someone is a Jew or a Pole or a Ukrainian, as long as he or she cares for the good of this country, we are all one. We all live in one society. We are the fabrics of that society. When it comes to the past, of course, it's easy to fall victims of, generalization, coming to general conclusions, labeling nations or parts of the nation for being good or bad. But I believe that it would make a lot of sense to focus on facts and always remember that responsibility for a crime is personal. This is the founding principle of a criminal law, of a national criminal law, but also of an international criminal law. There is always someone who violates the law and commits a crime. And in that sense, I'm absolutely confident, and I believe this has been the practice in Ukraine, that anyone committing an anti-Semitic act should bear responsibility for its wrongdoing, for its crime. This is clear. If you violate the law, you have to bear responsibility for that. While honoring the past, I'm really looking forward. I'm a forward-looking person, and Ukrainians whom I see around me also seem to be forward-looking. And in Ukraine that we are building, I want it to be a country, a multinational country, not only including those nations and communities which have been part of us for hundreds of years, like Jews, like Crimean Tatars, like Hungarians, like others, but any nation, any race, any religion should be welcome in Ukraine. And in that context, I would like to recall the recent decision of the president of Ukraine to recognize Rosh Hashanah as a national holiday in Ukraine, and also some Muslim festivities were recognized. This is the country we are building. The country that stands against aggression, but that accepts all nations, all religions, and all races as part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now hand it over to Ambassador Leon.
Thank you very much, and hello again to all the friends around. The question was how anti-Semitic is Ukraine today. You said that there are the reports and the surveys that gave some answers. I'm looking at the facts. First of all, we will have to ask the question, when we ask Ukraine, what is Ukraine? Are we talking about the government, or are we talking about the people? Are we talking about all the people, or are we talking about certain categories of people? So first of all, it should be clear, and Minister Kuleba said it, and not only said it, but I see also the facts. The Ukrainian government is far, far, far from being anti-Semitic. The Ukrainian government is doing everything that he can in order to fight anti-Semitism. The second thing is about the question about the people. The questions of anti-Semitism is, what is anti-Semitism? And the differences, if there is anti-Semitism or not in Ukraine, are coming because of the lack of definition of anti-Semitism. For a little bit more than 2 years now here in Ukraine, I am calling upon the Ukrainian government to adopt the definition, the working definition of IRA, of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the working definition and anti-Semitism, in order to have a common basis to see what is an anti-Semitic act. Because if monument to the victims of the Shoah was desecrated by somebody, it shouldn't be seen as a hooligan act, but as an anti-Semitic act. According to the legislation in Ukraine, this act will be pursued as hooliganism and not as anti-Semitism. So when I'm coming and saying that there are hundreds of anti-Semitic acts in Ukraine, the Ukrainian officials are telling me, no, there are only 13 or 20, because according to their definition, anti-Semitism is something else. The second point is anti-Semitism in the social media. We see hundreds of posts who are very anti-Semitic and very offensive to the Jewish nation. Nothing can be done against this because the Ukrainian legislation doesn't see it as anti-Semitic. So we have, first of all, to have our common basis. What is anti-Semitism and what can we do? We proposed to Ukraine to have some seminar to fight anti-Semitism, because the basics of fighting anti-Semitism is education of law enforcement officers, education of teachers. Again, yes, there is anti-Semitism in Ukraine. It is not a governmental anti-Semitism. It is not an institutional anti-Semitism, but there is a high level of anti-Semitism in Ukraine, and together we have to do everything to fight it. The State of Israel, together with Ukraine, in order to have a better future for both our nations.
Thank you. I'll now hand the floor over to Ms. von Schnurbein.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here in this round. I would like to respond to what the foreign minister said, and also Ambassador Leon, because I think it fits very well with what we have been trying to do also on European level. First of all, with regards to the past, I think it's difficult to build a future without coming to grips with the past. We have that experience in the European Union, how painful it can be, how difficult it can be, but also how necessary it is. And in that regard, we have supported independent research about the Holocaust to ensure that we can look at the facts, as the foreign minister said, and ensure that that our narratives don't get disturbed by the way we see the Second World War in particular, and the fact that the Ukraine was a victim on the one side, but on the other side, of course, there was also collaboration of individuals, as was also already mentioned. So to ensure that there is a clear understanding of the past and the way that the Jewish community of Ukraine has been treated, has suffered, and was killed in Ukraine, also in collaboration. On the one side, and the other side, the fact that, of course, Ukraine was also a victim of Nazi Germany. So this, I think, is an important basis to start addressing anti-Semitism today as well. And we started in the European Union, and as you may know, that also, in the EU we have an enormous issue when it comes to addressing anti-Semitism, and we have to acknowledge that we need to, in all different areas of society. And my position was actually created 5 years ago only to in a systematic way look at what can be done. One thing that we did, and I fully agree with Ambassador Leon on this, is the fact that you can't fight it if you can't define it. we need to know what anti-Semitism is and what the various bits are today in order to be able to address it. And that means knowing the sources and knowing the groups where it comes from, but also knowing the various forms in which it can be expressed, from right-wing racist, Christian, Islamist anti-Semitism, to also left-wing anti-Semitism when it comes to anti-Zionism. So all these different forms need to be addressed, and the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition that I believe the Jewish Youth Organization tried to get adopted some 2 years ago is in Ukraine is a good instrument. We adopted it in a declaration in the European Parliament in 2017, and in 2018 all EU states by unanimity adopted a declaration against anti-Semitism, in which they also recommend the use of this definition, because it helps to see how, for example, anti-Semitic incidents can be recognized and then also become part of the data collection. When police and law enforcement encounter an anti-Semitic act, they need to know whether it is one or not, and in which category to place this incident, in order to get a real picture of how the situation truly is for the Jewish community. And therefore, we think that this non-legally binding definition is a good starting point. And by now, 18 EU member states have adopted this definition, not only with regards to law enforcement, but also with regards, for example, to addressing anti-Semitism through education, in the schools, and in societal environments. Finally, the issue of addressing also online anti-Semitism. I think we have seen also through COVID now that, on the one side, conspiracy myths have significantly increased during the lockdowns and during the rise of the COVID pandemic. And very quickly, we saw that there is a connection between general conspiracy ideas of where does this virus come from? It must come from somewhere, and blaming it on the Jewish community. And therefore, we saw in the different languages in various online circles that anti-Semitic remarks increased. And we see it now that it is happening from, say, the online sphere to the concrete world, with demonstrations we see against corona measures that overlap with anti-Semitic expressions and are connected to different extremist groups, from right-wing extremism to left-wing. It's a very broad mix, and it's very dangerous and needs to be addressed. And conspiracy myths, however, are not necessarily illegal. We have in Europe also legislation that requests, rather, we have a code of conduct that, based on legislation, obliges the platforms to take down illegal hate speech according to European legislation that is flagged to them within 24 hours. And there we see that there has been an improvement with regards to the takedowns on the one side, but in particular with regards to the responsibility that the platforms take with regards to keeping their platforms clean. We are far from what actually should, how clean the platforms should be, but we see that there has been progress. And we believe that we need to address both the conspiracy myths, also because, the road from conspiracy myths to actual hate crime in the real world is very short. and addressing hate speech by taking it down simply because it is illegal, and of course also because it is very harmful. Many of the attackers and terrorists that have attacked Jewish premises in the EU have radicalized themselves through the internet. And a recent study from Italy says that on the internet, people radicalize 4 times faster than in the real world. So it is essential to address hate speech online and conspiracy myths online. We think that it is important to ensure these structural changes and to see that we need long-term efforts in order to ensure that there is a sustainability in pushing back anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Rabbi Baker.
Thank you for this opportunity. You know, I regret that we can't all be together in person in Kiev. We're all obviously living through this pandemic, this coronavirus. And it brings to mind really a common analogy frequently used to explain anti-Semitism is sometimes to speak of it as a virus. It's a virus that can become severe, even lethal. It's a virus that perhaps can diminish. Unlike the COVID virus, there's no vaccine, and there will be no vaccine to eliminate anti-Semitism. So it might be useful to think of the various things that we're all doing now to try to at least mitigate the problem of the current virus as a way of understanding how to deal with anti-Semitism. We obviously know how important it is to identify sources of this virus, to track and trace people that have come down with it. It really goes to the very serious challenge of identifying anti-Semitism in society. I won't repeat what the previous speakers said about the value of a common, comprehensive, working definition of anti-Semitism that many governments have already adopted, and surely we all hope Ukraine will do that as well. If you're going to deal with anti-Semitism, as it's been said, you need to define it. You need to understand it. That's the first step that we all need to take. In identifying anti-Semitism, we have various ways also of categorizing it, measuring it, recording it. That's why it's so important that government, local and regional and national agencies collect data on anti-Semitism, recognize incidents for what they are, not, as it's been said, necessarily just acts of vandalism, but when Jewish sites are targeted, when anti-Semitic phrases or symbols are used, those are incidents of anti-Semitism. We need to identify them. Additionally, we know that there are steps that need to be taken, again, as we deal with the virus, to at least, if we can't eliminate it, to mitigate its spread. What kind of protective measures can be taken? And there too, I think we look throughout Europe in general, individual countries, at the importance of providing security for Jewish communities, for institutions, for synagogues, for schools, and also for Jews simply walking on the street. This is a problem that may be more severe in some countries than others, but it's something that we already have through the OSCE, European-wide measures, strategies, specific steps that governments should be taking to deal with the challenge of anti-Semitism. I think as well, we need to minimize the spread. Now, you referenced at the beginning 2 surveys with rather contradictory reports, the Pew survey and the one conducted by ADL. I think it also points, it should be obvious to the measured but limited value of surveys, although they are one tool we have to use, but also depending on questions and responses, how that may be measured. In particular, the Pew survey found that in general questions about attitude toward Jews, those in Ukraine had rather positive views, and they expressed that. The ADL survey referenced specific anti-Semitic stereotypes, and in this case, they seem to resonate at a much higher percentage. Now, that doesn't mean that the people that held those anti-Semitic stereotypes, issues such as conspiracy theories about Jews and so on, were themselves anti-Semitic, but the views they held were. So it really goes, I think, to the importance of education, of people understanding what are such negative views, what they mean, and also, which those general surveys will not share, what impact they have on local Jewish communities, on their own sense of comfort, of security in the larger society. This is an issue that the minister at the beginning spoke to, the role of the government in Ukraine to ensure the safety and security, to combat anti-Semitism. But the environment itself is also susceptible to the various impact of history, of events that have really had dramatic, tragic consequences for the pre-war, the pre-Holocaust Jewish population in Ukraine that was so numerous, that contributed so much to Ukrainian life and culture. And so we see, again, it's not unique to Ukraine. It's something we see in the region more generally. First, the Holocaust had such a direct and significant impact. As observers have pointed out, the Holocaust in Ukraine and much of the former Soviet Union was, as Father Patrick Dubois, who's researched this, termed it a Holocaust by bullets. We know Jews were taken from various towns and villages throughout Ukraine, marched only a short distance out of those towns, and shot and buried in mass graves. All done, at least witnessed by local Ukrainian residents, in some cases assisted, perhaps under duress, but assisted nonetheless by those people. And dealing with that history after half a century under communist domination has not been easy really for any country. But it's also one that in Ukraine has posed very difficult problems in addressing forthrightly. Those two are matters that really will impact on how Jews today see themselves, understand their place in the larger society, in this case, in Ukrainian life and culture. You put those things together, and I think we can devise very specific methods, techniques, tools, actions on the part of government, hopefully reinforced by leaders in civil society, that will do what is possible. Again, not necessarily to eliminate anti-Semitism. It is present where all of us live, but at least to really reduce its impact and make the society itself a more open, a more tolerant, a more respectful one, in which the Jewish community today, still a significant community throughout Europe, will see itself having a full and positive future in its life in the country today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All these statements have been extremely interesting. I mean, it's sort of in some ways derailed the questions I already had planned for you. So I'd like to start with a question to Minister Kuleba about what efforts is the government of Ukraine taking to combat anti-Semitism, and do you think that Ukraine will adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism?
Thank you. Well, I would like to echo what Ambassador said, and I appreciate his recognition that there is no government or any institutional anti-Semitism in Ukraine. The government does very simple things. The government reacts promptly when an act of anti-Semitism is committed, and we've been already through one of these situations with Ambassador over the last months since my appointment. We react firmly, promptly, leaving no doubts about the fact that we do not tolerate and accept anti-Semitic behavior in Ukraine. A large part, of course, is about education, and I agree that we should educate people about horrors of the past, but also about the future of the country that is built on mutual understanding between different nations. And the tragedy of Ukrainians, of what we suffered from communists, and an act of genocide was committed against us by Bolsheviks, by Stalin regime, makes us understand very well what national tragedies are about. And in that sense, we fully understand the pain and the horror of Shoah. I would also like to, when it comes to the definition, if I remember properly, in 2016, it was not Ukraine who blocked the adoption, the endorsement of this definition at the OSCE ministerial. Ukraine was ready to endorse it at the OSCE. We publicly supported the adoption of this definition in 2018 and 19 at the OSCE level as well. And after the visit of recent visit of Prime Minister of Israel Netanyahu to Ukraine, the government officially instructed all relevant agencies to consider the issue formally, officially, and provide its opinion on how to proceed with it. Finally, I would like to make a very short comment before I leave the stage in a couple of minutes, and I will have to apologize. We can, of course, refer to many different surveys. We can share our impressions, personal impressions of the level of anti-Semitism that we observe on social media or elsewhere. But the best answer to the question how anti-Semitic Ukrainian society is came in 2019, and this is the best survey you can get. When 73% of Ukrainian population, 73% of Ukrainians voted for a man with roots as president of Ukraine. I think this is the best answer we can get. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to, in that case, move on to another question that I think is very important. We've discussed already what kinds of anti-Semitism exist in Ukraine, but this is not a unique issue for Ukraine. There are other countries in Europe that have similar issues, as Ms. von Schnurben spoke about. What are some lessons that Ukraine can learn from the European experience of combating anti-Semitism and implement in its own country?
Well, I think it's not for the EU to teach lessons on how to address anti-Semitism. I think we are all in a situation where we struggle with actually finding the right answers. However, what I can say and see also now from different developments is that the challenge is to address address it in a structural way, in a sustainable manner. That means that, for example, when it comes to education, that there is a holistic approach as to how we see the past, how we look at the contribution of Ukrainian Jews to Ukrainian society before the Holocaust, and then what the Shoah actually meant in that case also for Ukrainian society, and what it means when we see anti-Semitic acts today. And I think this is an important understanding, that the focus really on Jewish life and the tragedy of the Shoah in that context. And we try to do that also. We have a European Holocaust remembrance infrastructure that we finance, where we link the different organizations that look at the historic facts of the Shoah, but also are engaged in educational efforts. I think that the membership in IRA can actually be very helpful in this. The Ukraine is not yet member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, but this could be something to be considered, because it is it allows for independent research and for an exchange also of experts and researchers on this issue. And the other important aspect is to ensure that anti-Semitism is made visible, that people actually understand what it is. And that can be done either by ensuring that not only the hate crime or the hateful acts of anti-Semitism are being recorded, as is often the case by the police, but also anti-Semitic acts that are maybe below that threshold, but are very poison the everyday life of the Jewish community. And I believe that for that purpose, the IRA definition can also be helpful, and is something that we are trying now in cooperation with the Jewish community to improve in the European member states. Actually, the declaration that the member states signed in 2018 agreed that every member state would have a national action plan against anti-Semitism that looks at the different aspects, from security to education to data collection to the way anti-Semitism is being addressed and portrayed also in the media across the board. Pardon. And puts all of this together in a national strategy. And we believe that these national strategies can help to have a systemic approach and systematic approach, and reach out to as broad a public society, but also the national structures, from the national to the local level. So this holistic approach seems very important. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing, yes, Minister Kuleva.
I just wanted to apologize, with your permission. I have to wrap up, unfortunately, but I want to say that it was my great pleasure to meet all of you online. Vienna and Brussels, OSCE and the European Union are very dear to my heart. I have never been to Israel yet, but I'm sure that once I'm there, it will become close to my heart as well. And this is not a hint that you should invite me. Mr. Moderator, thank you for your excellent moderation. I wish you a very successful and meaningful end of this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Rabbi Baker, I think you wanted to say something here.
A couple of points when you talk about what can be learned from other countries. I think confronting the history of the Holocaust is a particularly challenging issue for those countries where it took place. What we saw going back some years now was the creation of international historical commissions as a way to provide a clear and critical evaluation of what happened. This is something perhaps Ukraine can draw from. I mean, you do have two centers focused on Holocaust research and education in Kyiv and in Dnep, and they're doing important work, but spreading what they do to the larger society, incorporating it into educational programs, still are things that can be drawn from, again, other countries and what they're doing. I think it's also critical. The OSCE has identified commitments to which Ukraine has adhered or sworn to uphold, that really go to the importance of collecting data so we know the problem and we know where it takes place. This is something that much more, I think, can be done in Ukraine. The minister also referenced in 2016 efforts for the OSCE as a collective body to endorse that IRA working definition, and he's right in saying only one country really stood in the way of adoption, that was Russia. But since then, that definition has been adopted nationally by some 24 European countries. And it's, I think, that measure, and at our last gathering of this Kyiv Jewish Forum, we heard the expectation about adopting the definition and also, as Katrina referenced, joining IRA itself, which would be a valuable resource for Ukraine, particularly when it comes to addressing questions of Holocaust history and Holocaust remembrance.
Thank you for that, for those points, because they actually lead me to the next question I'd like to ask, and unfortunately this will have to be our final question. You mentioned that it's difficult sometimes to address the Holocaust in those countries where it happened, and Ukraine is certainly one country where this issue arises, the issue of historical memory, where there are figures in Ukrainian history who are viewed by some people in Ukraine as heroes, but are also implicated by historians in collaboration with the Nazis in violence against Jews and Poles. Ambassador Leon, you've been very outspoken on this issue. I'd like to know from your point of view, what would you like to see Ukraine do on this issue of historical memory?
As we said before, I mean, the first thing to do is to, what Sigmund Freud was saying, first of all, in order to understand that you are sick, you have to know that you have a problem. Only if you understand that you have a problem, then you can cure this sickness, or as Andrew said, it's this virus that you have. If you don't know that you have it, and you do not acknowledge the fact that you have it, it will be very hard to cure it. I think that Ukraine has to see into their heroes. It is very offensive for Jewish people to see a hero called Bogdan Khmelnytsky, who in Jewish history is the symbol of the pogroms of the Cossacks coming and killing Jews. It is very offensive for the Jewish people to see soldiers from Ukrainian origin who are wearing SS uniforms and are seen as heroes of Ukraine. I'm not judging right now if they were war criminals or they weren't war criminals. For us, as the Jewish people who saw these uniforms in Ukraine as the last thing that they saw, it was this SS uniform that they saw. For the Jewish people, and we, the State of Israel, as the voice, we see ourselves as the voice of the Jewish people, we cannot accept the fact that a person who wears an SS uniform is seen as a hero. So that's the question that we ask Ukraine. Are you able to look back to your history to see who are the real heroes? Are killers of Jews and Poles heroes? Or are musicians, generals who were not involved in war crimes, they are heroes? who are your heroes? Because a nation is defined by its heroes. So yes, I am very loud about the fact that Ukraine is glorifying people who were wearing the SS uniform or who killed Jews and Poles.
I'd like to ask you one final quick question about this. Where do you think that this reconsideration or this look at who heroes are should begin? Does it begin with education of children? Does it begin on a government level? Does it begin with historians? Where should that happen?
Historians. We proposed Ukraine to have a historical commission, Israel and Ukraine, not to talk only about the Holocaust or the period before the Holocaust, but about 1,500 years of cohabitation of Jews and Ukrainians, to have this historical commission and to begin the work.
Would anybody else like to comment on addressing an issue like this?
Let me comment briefly, if I may. The challenge we see, by the way, is taking place elsewhere in Europe and by the way, here in the United States as well, as we wrestle with a history, at least in America, of national leaders that were also very much in a former time complicit in a racist society, slave owners and the rest. We're not, I think, correctly canceling this history, but we're really challenged about telling the full story of these figures. I think we've seen in other countries in Europe fascist era leaders that have been rehabilitated and honored in a post-communist world, despite the fact, knowingly or not in that society, that they were very much involved in the murder of Jews. It's at least a debate that the society itself needs to have. And that's something that really has been lacking in various places, and Ukraine is one of them. So I think, as Ambassador Leon rightly indicates, a first step to address this would be an international historical commission. The goal, though, is not only to bring something into the educational curricula and the like, but also to the public at large. And there are various forms for promoting public education, museum, debates, discussions. All of those are things that I think could be a very healthy step for countries, in this case for Ukraine, to take.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank all our panelists for joining us today. It's really great as a moderator when you only have to give a few questions and the discussion just flows in such an interesting direction. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone. It was so great to see you. I think years I haven't seen all these good friends that I see here on the screen. So thank you to the Kyiv Jewish Forum to put us together.
Hopefully next year in Kyiv.
Yes.
Indeed.
Definitely.
Yes. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.